Today's guest is an educator, mental health expert, and specialist in neurodiversity. Over the past 15 years, she has impacted thousands of students and families across North America. Today, she's going to share with you new insights, ideas, and information to understand neurodiversity. Would you please help us welcome our good friend, Dr. Kristen Eccleston? Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, I love this topic, and what makes it even more important for me today was that I had my braces removed last night. And so for the past 6 months, I've been talking with wires getting caught in my lips. So it's a pleasure to be able to speak freely today. And hopefully we can speak freely on this platform about a very important topic. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me.
Now, the field of neurodiversity, it's gaining a lot of awareness here in Asia. And I'd like to understand your definition of neurodiversity and then what attracted you to the field of neurodiversity.
Absolutely. So when I'm trying to explain what neurodiversity is to individuals, I like to kind of break it down to different diagnoses and how they're kind of all similar and related. I think of them as cousins, and some of them are a little bit more like siblings, but it typically encompasses ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, sensory processing disorder, Tourette's would even fall into that category. And some of them all have a little bit of a tendency to have similar symptoms associated with it. So some people go, oh, I'm autistic, but no, really, ADHD is really what's happening there, or more of a sensory processing disorder is what's happening there. So they have very similar traits to one another. If you think of a Venn diagram, they all kind of circle through each other just a little bit. But what they really are is just a different way of thinking or a different way of seeing the world. And what I have found is that most people who are neurodiverse are actually incredibly intelligent individuals. Usually, if you look at any kind of educational assessments associated with them, they're very smart, they're very bright, they're very capable, but their brain is just processing information a little bit differently. It's very analytical. Instead of seeing one option, it's seeing 500 options at one time. So it's a very complex brain that I think has almost limited possibilities to what it's capable of, and unfortunately has a little bit of a bad rap because you have words like disorder associated with a lot of things, autism spectrum disorder or attention deficit disorder, but it's not really a disorder. It's just a different way that the brain processes and takes in information. And how I kind of got associated with neurodiversity was for a very long time before I'm doing what I do now I was a special education teacher. So I worked in the education, students with special education needs. So just through my university training and education, I was introduced to neurodiversity. And I started to realize as I was learning about it that, wow, a lot of this seems really familiar to me, like as if I understood it at a deeper level. And when I was about 30 years old, I went into my doctor and they asked me if I thought I was ADHD. And I said to my doctor, I said, I think I might be a little bit. I'm aware of what it is as a special education teacher. And they said, well, let's do some rating scales. Let's see where you might fall on this. So I do the assessments. The doctor looks over it and she turns to me and she goes, you're not a little bit of ADHD. You're a lot of it at ADHD. And it just seemed like after that, my life made a lot more sense. School situations for me, how I learned, just started to really click and make a lot more sense to me. And so I continued on as an educator, and specifically towards the end of my the education setting career, I was working with students with mental health needs. And I found that a lot of my students who were impacted with mental health needs were also neurodiverse. And that's ultimately what led me to go back and focus my doctoral studies on mental health in the education setting and really take on having a deeper knowledge of mental health and neurodiversity in school, because I saw the need and I saw the correlation between the two.
It's such an incredible story. A beautiful story, and it reminds me of our mayor in Taipei, and he's on the spectrum of Asperger's. He's a brain surgeon, and the way he responds to the public questions is just so brutally honest, where so many politicians will use spin to answer a question. He would just brutally, honestly answer the question, and the public love him. He served 2 terms as mayor of Taipei, and people would love to see him as the president. And I think he's great because he is his own person. He catches the train to work every day as the mayor. He wears his pants up under his waist. He wears his mobile phone on the front of his waist. And he's just an incredible person. And people love him. And I think he's a great role model here in Taiwan for anybody who has been labelled with some type of disorder. I remember when I went to primary school, I was diagnosed with linear sequential learning disorder. Mm-hmm. But then later on in life, I learned that it's impossible not to learn. So I had to realise that I was probably being taught the wrong way. And in my mind, I said, I don't have a disability, a learning disability. I believe there was a teaching disability. They just didn't know how to teach me. And this repeated. So I went to university when I was probably about 33, and I was learning the Chinese language. And I was in the classroom, and you had to learn 90 words per day. And there was other students learning these 90 words, but for me, they were just regurgitating these words. Mm. And I said to the teacher, I said, this is not for me. I can't learn like this. I would like to learn one-to-one. So I learned one-to-one, and it was just like a private lecture. Learn 90 words per day. And I said, look, I'm happy to pay more, but would you mind taking me down the street and showing me how to use these words? Like, teach me once how to order food and I'll remember it for life. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, we can't do that. And I said, why not? They said, because we can only teach in the classroom. I said, well, I learn outside of the classroom. And so I had to leave the university because it was the teaching style that didn't work with my learning style. So I know what it's like to be labelled disabled when in reality, everybody can learn. We just have to learn how to do it for our unique style. Now, for students who have ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, mm-hmm. how do they interact differently with the educational system?
That's a great question. So the way I look at it is education systems are almost set up for a one-size-fits-all. It's a box. If you don't fit into this box, then you get these messages. And I think there's been a research study that shows that students who are neurodiverse get anywhere from 4,000 negative messages given to them in any given day in school. You know, you're so smart. If you just tried a little bit harder, you could do it. Why are you being so lazy? You know, I know you're capable, but you're just not giving it your maximum effort. Or why aren't you paying attention? Or why are you not focused? Or you're daydreaming? And they get all these negative messages. I'll even give you an actual real world example for a client of mine I was working with. I was sitting in this meeting and they were telling me about how the student wouldn't engage with the teacher in the lesson because she was so focused on being able to get to her tablet and be able to draw while the teacher was talking. They tried one day giving her tablet during the lesson. And I said, okay, well, how did that go? And they go, well, she engaged a lot more and she participated and she raised her hand while she was drawing. And I said, so have you continued to give her tablet? Well, no. Well, why not? If she was showing you that she was engaged in the lesson and she was learning and you're having struggles with getting her to do that unless the tablet is there, why wouldn't you give her the tablet? She's showing you that she can multitask. And if anything, it's a preferred way for her to learn is to multitask while you're teaching her. And that just seemed to blow their mind a little bit and boggle them because we have this concept that students are only learning and paying attention if they're sitting and they're looking at us and they're paying attention and they're writing down everything they're saying. And that's not the case for a lot of students, especially neurodiverse students. They're capable of multitasking or they need that extra stimulation or they need to not be distracted by, oh, I really want to get to this task or I really want to do this. So if you're letting them do that, then their brain is freed up to be able to pay attention to the other things that the teacher is trying to share with them. So I find a lot of students who are neurodiverse get these messages from teachers that they're not good students or they're not learning the right way or they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's all these negative messages that oftentimes lead to ideas of having mental health issues that come about from it, from being self-conscious of who they are as a learner. And it's really as you shared, it's more of a teaching disability than it is a student. These students all are capable of learning. They just don't learn in that one size fits all box. They need it to be a little more tailored to who they are as an individual and who they are as a learner. A lot of people who are neurodiverse need a little bit more creativity or hands-on learning or experiences like you shared, like going down the street and being immersed in the learning instead of having someone just talk at them. And that's really the issue that I find with these students who struggle in school. It's not that they're not capable, and it's not that they're not bright. They're not being taught in a way that is most conducive for who they are as a learner and allowing them to find the success.
I'm thinking about how I learn. I like to go into a situation, I like to observe, and I'll take a ton of notes, and then I don't want to be tested immediately. I want to go back, I want to retreat inside. I have that preference for introversion, and I try to make sense of all of this information inside of me without having a conversation, just processing all of my past experiences, processing the information through my wants and needs for the future. And once I allow it to sit for a couple of days and settle in, then what I'll do is I'll externalize it. And then I can share metaphors, examples of how this would have impacted me in the past and how it's going to benefit me in the future. And if I get the opportunity to do that, then I know I've learned. But my struggle was at school was I couldn't express my thoughts and feelings in the exam because the exam limited me to A or B options. But in my mind, it's saying there's also option C and option D. And so my responses were always wrong. And some of the things you said before, Daniel, you just need to pay more attention to the questions. Well, I don't think it's a good question because I think there's something beyond that. And you learn to get punished for your creativity. And so I know a lot of other people experiencing this problem. The other problem that I faced was I couldn't articulate it as a child or a teenager, but I was always asking myself the question, why am I learning this? And nobody in the school system ever told me why I'm learning calculus, why I'm learning these formulas. If somebody said to me, Daniel, what do you want to do in the future? I would have responded, I want to travel the world and I want to help people and I want to work from home. And if the teacher had the system in place to say, well, Daniel, if you want to work from home, you're going to have to understand mathematical formulas because you're going to need to use social media, you're going to need to track your numbers, and you're going to need to communicate to people via the internet. I would have given them 100% of my attention because the learning had reason. But for some of it, I just sat there going, okay, I'm here for a whole semester and I still can't figure out what am I going to do with this. And it was really frustrating.
And you were asking,
I knew I needed it.
Yeah, and you were asking questions because most neurodiverse brains need to have that dopamine seeking, right? There's a lack of dopamine in most neurodiverse brains, especially those with ADHD. And it's the excitement of understanding why you're learning it and now it's piqued your interest that gets you engaged in it. And when they weren't giving you that response, that's what was killing that dopamine. You weren't getting that satisfaction from it. So it wasn't as meaningful for you. And unfortunately with neurodiverse brains, when the learning or the information is not meaningful, it's very hard to engage. Not that you can't engage, but your interest just isn't there. And so your brain is checked out and it's seeking the things that will give it that dopamine. So it's busy off doing those things instead of focusing on the learning because they didn't satisfy your curiosity that would have engaged you if they had given you that information.
I wish you had educated my school because my mother wouldn't have got so many telephone calls. The senior master would ring up. Mrs. Tolson, this is the senior master of boys. Did you know your son has bleached his hair blonde? And she said, yes, I'm a hairdresser. Of course he's bleached his hair blonde. And it's not as bad as a tattoo. Mrs. Tolson, could you come to the school? The next teacher would ring. It's the maths department. Mrs. Tolson, your son has been using coloured pencils in maths class. And she said, well, isn't that a good thing? Isn't that how it would help him remember? This is a grammar school. We just use black or blue pens. Would you please come down and explain yourself? My mum was forever getting these telephone calls, but she knew
ridiculous, right? Like, think about what they called over the fact that you were using colored pencils, which could have been easily a way that you were remembering in the information, but because it wasn't in black and white like they wanted it to be, that was worthy of a phone call.
Yeah. And all those comments that you mentioned before, if Daniel just paid more attention, the problem was it wasn't lacking attention, was I saw it and understood it so fast that I'd get bored waiting for all the intellects to catch up, because I'd seen it and said, okay, I understand this, and now I've got to stick it around for 20 or 30 minutes for everybody to catch up. And then the problems begin, because what do? You rub your feet on the floor and then you reach over and you zap somebody on the ear with the static electricity. But you've already learned. So
Right.
I think if we could understand this, especially as parents, and when I look at my children today, I can see their response to education is very different than my was. My father-in-law is a professor, and he specialises in marine biology. And so my daughter studies like him. But I can see that my boy, he's a maths genius. He sees a maths equation once, and he's learned it. Now, he was doing that since he was 4, but then he gets bored, so he runs around in circles. And I say to my wife, it's his intelligence, and he's bored because he's already learned it, and he's ready to move on.
Absolutely.
So we've got to put him in a different environment that suits him.
No,
So
absolutely. You see that with a lot of students. You see those behaviors pop up because it's just like you said, they learned it, they understand it, and now they're bored. And then that impulse control creeps in, because that is a factor. There's sometimes that lack of impulse there with people who are neurodiverse, because you're looking for dopamine, you're excited, you're interested, you're just like, let's try it, let's go for it. And then sometimes it gets you in a little bit of trouble at school, but it's because you're not being stimulated, because you've already mastered the concept and you're waiting for everyone else. But oftentimes you get labeled as the person who's behind instead of the person who's ahead.
Yes. My self-esteem's rising. I love this.
Good. I'm glad.
For the neurodivergent families, what are some of the impacts on the mental and emotional health for the parents? Because as a child going through this, my mother made many sacrifices, both with time, career, and finances. I know we think a lot about the students, but what about the mental and emotional impact on the parents?
I think there's a lot of factors there with the mental health on parents. I think one, as a parent, anytime you're seeing your child struggle or hurting or feeling bad about themselves, you immediately take that on and absorb that as a parent. I think that's only natural as a parent. Don't want to see your children hurt. So I think that is something that can impact a parent's mental health, because it's, how do I make this better? And especially if you don't have the resources, you're not sure what to do, or you're not even sure what's happening, that can play a factor too. But even if you are fortunate enough to get a diagnosis, okay, you know that your child is dealing with whatever it is that you're dealing with, it still plays a role. I know that my daughter has ADHD. I know that school is very similar for her as it was for me. And there's times where she excels and there's times where she struggles. And it's hard to watch her struggle, and it's hard to watch the self-esteem issues that she's going through because she's feeling a certain way about herself as a learner. That's hard as a parent. I also think it can be difficult as a parent because when your child isn't sure what's happening to them, you can see a lot of different behaviors, but behaviors always have a root cause to them. That's the one thing I want to share with parents, is there's always a root cause. And a lot of times children don't necessarily know what's going on with them. So they don't know how to express to you what it is that they're feeling or what's going on. So you might see it in behaviors or outbursts. And oftentimes parents are a safe space for children. So even if they hold it together all day at school and then they come home and they fall apart and the parents, what? It's not happening at school. Why is this happening here? It might be because you're the safe space and they masked it all day. And now they're finally letting go. They're tired when they get home, but that wears on parents' mental health. So I would say if you're seeing symptoms from your child where they are falling apart, there's behaviors that are happening that you might not necessarily understand. Why is this happening? Why is my child angry? Why is my child frustrated? Even if you call the school and they say, well, we're not seeing this at school, I would always recommend going in in and talking with your child's doctor about what's going on, because that's probably going to help give you some relief too. If you can kind of help figure out what the root cause of what's going on with your child, and helping get them relief will hopefully give you some of that relief as a parent too, because it is difficult. It's difficult to see your child struggle, and it's difficult when there's behaviors going on, especially if you've worked all day and you're tired yourself and you're not sure what to do. So I would always talk with a provider, because there are root causes and things that are going on that can usually be fixed if the right resources are put into place.
I had an experience recently where I got to observe my son and daughter at school. So they both go to Montessori schools. So I went and observed, and I sat there and I said, this is not my children. And the way that they behaved at school was totally different to the way that they behaved at home. And my first reaction as a father was, I want to get them out of this environment. Now, it wasn't that it was dangerous. There was nothing negative happening. I just didn't recognize my children, because I'm here all day. I don't know what learning is like in the classroom, sub 20 years later. I don't know what it looks like. And you sit there and go, this is not my children. And it happened to me once, and I said to my wife, I want to bring Nikita home. She said, why? And I said, I'm observing her at school. She says, this is the way they're learning. And so a couple of years later, I went back and I saw Caesar at school, and he was so different. And I just wanted to pull him out of that classroom, because I wasn't used to it. And I thought, maybe I'm responsible for this in some way, shape or form. And I could feel this feeling of blame, because maybe I'm putting them in the wrong environment, but I know it's the best for them. And it was very confusing as a father. I had to trust in the Montessori system, but I have my own intuitions that aren't always right. They make you think and feel certain things. They're not always correct. And I had to battle that on the inside. And it was a very interesting feeling, because I think it triggered a lot of unresolved emotions from my past. As you mentioned before, some of these things the teachers would say, if they just paid a little bit more attention, they'd be a good student. And it's like, oh, have I passed this on? Is it my fault? And I think a lot of parents are stuck in blame, and it weighs heavy on their heart.
Absolutely. And I think that's because we, especially if you are a neurodiverse or somebody who learned differently growing up, then you got those messages. And I think how those messages felt to you as a learner. And I think as parents, that's the last thing we want our child to have to go through, right? Is those feelings that we felt when we were in school, when we knew we weren't doing anything wrong, or we were trying our best, or we were giving it everything we had, but we were still getting negative messages. And I think that's something that we worry about. We don't want our child to have to feel the feelings that we felt or go through. We want to hope that there's a better level of understanding that exists now that maybe wasn't. And I think we are moving on that path. I think when I was a young girl, ADHD, especially in females, was not a thing. It was non-existent. I mean, if you had ADHD, it was thought of very hyperactive little boys who couldn't sit still, who were all over the place. And even that was like a mythical creature, right? That was like, oh, your parents aren't doing their job type of thing. Fast forward, 20, 25 years, we recognize that it is a disorder. It is ADHD. And guess what? It's not just hyperactivity. There's inattentive too. And a lot of females are the daydreamers, because it's all happening up here in their head instead of outward. So I'd like to think that we're moving forward in that. So know that we all know the feels as students, as once being students, and we don't want our children to have to feel that. But hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully teachers are a little bit more aware and a little bit more knowledgeable in these things. And hopefully, and that's why I do what I do now, is trying to move us in a direction so that teachers have the skill sets that they need to help empower students who are neurodiverse, versus continuing the process of helping them to feel bad about themselves or feeling like they're not capable.
And you've been impacting thousands of lives over the past 15 years. How do you support students that are avoidant or have difficult times when they attend school? How do you support those students?
Absolutely. So actually, it's funny in an education setting, I think about it, I actually put education second when I'm supporting those students. When I'm working with students who have really just lost all hope in attending school or having difficulties attending school, I make learning the second priority. It's all about your social emotional well-being at that point in time, because a good teacher can help you learn, but if you're not available for learning, then it doesn't matter what I'm teaching you. I've got to help
Not available.
you be available for learning first. And so most of the time what I do is I work with families and I work with schools to kind of strip things back down to the very basic level of what that student needs. And it looks different for every student. Some students, it's a setting piece. Going into school where there's thousands of children and being in a class of 30 is incredibly overwhelming, and they just couldn't handle that. And so it's a switch in setting, and that fixes it. Some students, it's more complex than that. It's, can we practice touching the front door today? And how many times do we need to practice touching the front door? Once we've got that mastered, can we walk through the front door? Once we have that mastered, can we sit in a class? No work, you don't have to do anything, but can you just sit there? And we just build it back up until they're ready to re-engage in that learning and they're available for it again. But I think oftentimes we see this issue, students aren't coming to school, and it's just, we'll make them come to school, just make it happen. And you can't just make it happen. You have to empower that student a little bit, let them feel like they're in the driver's seat, allow them to have a voice and express what their concerns are. And then again, make that learning the secondary factor, and you've got to work on that availability and building up that tolerance factor. And that's where I have found success with students, is working at the problem that way instead of just forcing them to be in a setting that was obviously not working for them.
I love that. I can imagine these little door handles, these signs at the hotel, emotionally unavailable for learning right now. Mm-hmm. And it's so true. What I've learned over the years is that learning is state dependent. So you've got to be in the right emotional state to learn and then to recall. And for me, if I reflect on my time, it was always so painful learning. It was always associated with, you're a naughty boy, you're in trouble, you've made a mistake. And that was where my learning was connected. So over the years, having a theoretical driving force where I love to learn, learning was also simultaneously painful. So I would see myself avoid it, and it makes sense. I was just emotionally unavailable to learn. And if I could get in that right emotional state, I knew I could learn anything. So for parents who want to learn more about what you do, tell us more about your website and how we can connect with you online to point our children in the right direction.
Absolutely. So parents can visit me at www.neurodiverseteacher.com. On that website, there's links to contact me. There's links to my advocacy work, or even just reaching out to me and asking me questions. I'm always open to having conversations. I mean, truly my mission is to support our youth in feeling empowered, especially our neurodiverse youth who are dealing with mental health issues because of that factor. I want them to be able to come out of school feeling prepared and ready to go to reach their goals and their dreams, instead of having to spend the next 10 years or the next decade trying to build themselves back up and feeling good about themselves and discovering, oh, wait, maybe I'm a lot more capable than I thought I was. I don't want them to have to be like me and have to take those 10 years to finally figure that out. That's not what school should be setting students up for. It should be setting them up for success. So parents can visit me on this website, or I'm on social media, both Instagram and TikTok at the.neurodiverse.teacher. And I'm always happy to answer questions or help in any way that I can.
I love it. ADHD is my superpower. I think we're going to embrace this.
Yes.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, this has just been the most phenomenal conversation. Being a student myself today, learning directly from you, has been very empowering. And I know that for our audience, it's going to answer a lot of questions, because some of these people are starting to wake up and they realize that there is something that's preventing them from getting what they want. And they tend to beat themselves up because they've got all the knowledge, they've got all the skill, but something's just blocking them from putting it into place. And I think if they start to follow you and learn more about some of these limitations and how to turn them into a superpower, then they're going to be on the right track.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being here. If you could share one word of advice for a parent who thinks their child might be on the spectrum and they haven't consulted a professional yet, what would you say to the parent?
I would say if you're even thinking that that could be a possibility, please consult a professional. I think the sooner that your child can start to embrace who they are, and you can help them embrace who they are, and they can start to get the services and supports at school that really are tailored to who they are as a learner, that is going to make such a difference in their life and feeling good about who they are and how they learn. Once they realize that it's not that there's something wrong with them, it's they have that superpower, that ADHD, that neurodiverse superpower that really does have a lot of positives associated with it too. And really, like I said earlier in this podcast, a lot of people who are neurodiverse are incredibly bright individuals who are capable of so many things. So the sooner you can start getting them the supports that they need, the more likely they are to have those positive feelings about who they are as a learner and really start to be able to change and shape the world.
So well said. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kristen Eccleston, I want you to go to the website now, theneurodiverseteacher.com. The link is in the show notes, and make sure you follow her across all social platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, remember, one new idea at the right time is enough to change your life. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Dr. Kristen.